All right, looks like we're ready to go.
We are live.
All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Sumayyah Waheed. I'm a board member of CAIR Washington. Thanks for joining us today. I'm moderating today's conversation, and as you know, it's around keeping our mosques and Masajid safe. This is given the recent spate of attacks that have happened both in Washington and across the country. And so and it's in the broader context of rising hate and white nationalist violence that, has given a lot of us cause for concern. So I wanted to quickly introduce myself and the panelists, then ask each panelist an opening question, and then we're going to turn it into more of a conversation from there. I think there's a lot of important issues to be discussing, and really excited to have the folks who are on here today to help us talk through these concerns. So I'm Sumayyah, as I said. I'm an attorney and consultant currently working as Senior Policy Counsel for Muslim Advocates, which is tracking anti-Muslim incidents nationally. But today I'm here in my CAIR capacity as a board member. And then we also have Brother Naeem Shareef, who is born and raised in Seattle, Washington, a pillar of our community and the Al-Islam Islam Center community, and a founding member of the Nation of Islam and original member of the former member of the Nation of Islam, an original member of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. He is also a public access TV producer and runs the YouTube channel for the Al-Islam Center discussing community issues. So we're really excited to have you on today and share your wisdom with us. We also have Luis Segura, who is the civil rights attorney at CAIR Washington, a former attorney with the Brooklyn DA's office. Luis is a zealous advocate with a lifelong passion for seeking truth and righting wrongs. He has successfully prosecuted hundreds of serious victim cases in New York and Colorado. Born in Colombia and raised in New York, Luis moved to Seattle this summer to join the growing legal team at CAIR Washington. So thanks for joining us at CAIR Washington and for joining us today. Imraan Siddiqi is the executive director at CAIR Washington and a prominent voice for justice in the American Muslim community. Born in Auburn, Alabama, Imraan spent most of his life in the Atlanta area. He's been a leading voice on social media, such as starting the hashtag No Ban, No Wall campaign, and has led many nationally and globally recognized social media campaigns. He has appeared in media outlets across the world for his commentary on a wide array of issues. So thank you all for joining us again. And I wanted to turn to you first, Imraan. Can you briefly give us some more context for why we're talking today? I know you've been on the front lines of meeting with community members, and you can give us maybe an update on what's happened. Well, first of all, for folks who don't know what has happened in our state of Washington, and then any updates that you can give from your interactions with community members.
Yeah, thank you, Sumayyah, and I'm glad to be a part of this panel. And I think today you're going to hear from some important different perspectives from the community. Happy to have Luis here as a legal expert, and Brother Naeem as somebody who's been here for so many years and been entrenched in the community as well, and Sumayyah as a attorney and advocate as well. But yeah, I mean, talking under these circumstances, it's never great to have to come together after some negative type things happen in the community. But we've seen some recent major attacks that have taken place on Islamic houses of worship recently, most notably the arson that took place at the Islamic Center of Tacoma just a few weeks back. Very disheartening to see such a brazen attack with worshipers inside. A very dangerous situation there. Thankfully, nobody was hurt in that attack, but it caused extensive fire damage, water damage, and smoke damage to the community center over there, and basically rendered it unusable for the foreseeable future until it gets repaired. Just a week after that took place, then you see the attack on the Umar al-Farouk Islamic Center in Mount Lake Terrace, where you see two individuals come into the prayer space over there with their shoes on and just disrespecting the space in that way. But they also went to the shelves, they took off, religious items and Qurans, they put them inside of a trash bag, and then they were seen on surveillance video throwing those items into a dumpster as well. And that's just locally. And then we've seen a Sikh Gurdwara attacked just a month before that in Federal Way, where you see somebody coming in and destroying pieces of property over there, causing tens of thousands of dollars in damage, taking equipment and things like that, something that's extremely jarring for that community as well. And then multiple attacks on churches locally as well. So it really raises a lot of questions internally, not just from a local level, but on a nationwide level. There's been an upswing in disturbing attacks on Islamic centers. There was an attack on a mosque in Bloomington, Indiana. There was desecration of an Islamic cemetery in Minnesota as well. So there's all kinds of incidents that are popping up here. And it's not to say necessarily that these types of incidents are the responsibility of one group or one sort of ideology that's out there, but it also, I think, points to the fact that we as communities here, especially our Muslim community, need to be vigilant in terms of protecting our spaces and like really have a robust community conversation in terms of how that happens. I have seen I think I'll just say that the way that the Islamic Center of Tacoma has been handling the situation has been amazing, just showing how they're a pillar of the community over there and really have been embraced by the community. They've been offered spaces by churches and different groups out there, really embraced by the interfaith community. I just attended an interfaith gathering there just this past Sunday, and it was amazing to see the outpouring of love from policymakers, from people in the interfaith community and beyond. So that's really heartening to see that. And also the Tacoma Community College offered them a space to use for prayers indefinitely. So I think, just that community coming together and really embracing them, I think has really taken a lot of the sting off of the situation. There's been a great response in terms of the GoFundMe or the Launch Good campaign for helping rebuild the Islamic Center with, I think, over $330,000 raised so far, alhamdulillah. Same thing with Mount Lake Terrace Mosque. They've done, everything great, like in terms of their communication with law enforcement agencies and like how they're interacting with folks in the community and things like that. So I think these are two like really good examples of what we can do as community members to entrench ourselves deeper in our communities and make sure that we have those things in mind just to stay safe for the future. So that's sort of a broad overview of things that are going on right now. We definitely don't want to see any type of attacks like this moving forward, but we need to just have a conversation about what are the steps that we need to take to make sure our facilities are safe. And I'm sure, Luis and Brother Naeem will have some great insight here as well.
Yes, thank you, Imraan. Obviously, people are concerned and want to hear more. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Luis. What is your advice for mosque leaders immediately after an incident?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. As you mentioned, I do have several years of experience working in prosecution and on victim cases, serious victim cases of all types, both with members of the police department in different agencies and with members of the community, witnesses to crimes, victims of crimes. And my main goal here is to help kind of demystify those interactions and to help empower community members to be aware of their surroundings, to know their rights in terms of interacting with the police and with the district attorney's office. Unfortunately, under these circumstances, it's not favorable and it may be chaotic. But there are certain things that you can do to empower yourself and to assist in making it more likely that an investigation will go successfully and that a prosecution will go successfully when someone does, vandalize a house of worship. And so as far as immediately after the incident occurs, the main concern is safety. You want to make sure that you're safe. You want to make sure that there's no active danger, and you're going to make that phone call, obviously, to law enforcement because you want as quick of a response as possible. You don't want to delay it And you want to make sure that as much information is obtained early on, and as many people are available to speak to the police when they respond, and to make their job easier in terms of looking into what happened and who did it. One thing to always keep in mind is, you don't know who is responding. They're people, right? And so they may be in a certain headspace or a certain mood or whatever, but the scene is chaotic. Just focus on what you can control and how you can put yourself in a better position to get the police to focus on things that they should be focused on. As far as the surveillance system, make sure that if you're someone who has access to the surveillance system, the video surveillance of the mosque, you're making sure that it's up to date, you're making sure that it's functioning, you're making sure that it's facing key areas of the building, entrances, exits, obviously, if you can, and you're going to make sure that that is properly calibrated. Oftentimes, we're not thinking about these things until after the fact, until after we're trying to find video of what happened. And so we want to make sure we're proactive in making sure that if there's a timestamp and a date stamp on the surveillance system, that it's accurate, that it's covering areas of concern in the building, and that it's going to put you in the best position possible to identify and hold somebody accountable for such an attack. So once the scene appears to be safe, police have responded. Obviously, you want to make sure you're paying attention to anything that's out of the ordinary. Is anything out of place? Specifically, obviously, religious items, as we have seen that were destroyed recently in one of the incidents. That's the kind of information that you're going to want to pay attention to, and that you're going to want to make sure you communicate to the investigator. And that could be obviously a sign of a potential hate crime, right? If somebody's focusing on religious items, if somebody's desecrating anything in that sense, or leaving any kind of graffiti, any marking, any kind of indication that the intention of that act was actually a hate crime, is going to be relevant to the police. You want to make sure you pay attention to that and you provide that information. You want to make sure you take note of anything that's out of the ordinary. You take photos. Police will take photos, but I would say don't assume that they're going to cover everything, and don't assume that they're going to be as thorough as you would like them to be. And so on top of letting them do their thing, you're going to make sure that you also take photos that you need to take and make note of things that you need to make note of to make sure you preserve that information. As far as, if you don't know how the person entered, you may want to the extent that you can, prevent yourself from touching items, touching surfaces that could later be examined for DNA or fingerprints. Now, that's not to say that every single time that an incident happens, police will try to get that information, or that they may not even be able to get it. And so, but you want to make sure that if something doesn't have to be touched, then don't touch it until it's looked at and examined. They may dust for fingerprints, they may check for DNA. In those kind of cases, the investigation could take a long time. And so be mindful that, you might have to leave that space clear. Be mindful of later on, if there are fingerprints or DNA recovered, that whoever is available to provide what's called an elimination sample is made available. And that's just basically to show whether or not something that was touched by somebody who isn't normally supposed to be there, right? And that's going to help kind of lead the investigators down the road of identifying who was there and who was involved. As far as the video surveillance, you want to make sure that there's what's called what I would call a video custodian, which is the person who is aware of the system, the person who knows how it works, the person who knows how to retrieve video recording from it. whether there's audio involved and all that. And they're going to be the person that's going to be very important to the police in order to pull that and to use that in their investigation. And you know that system better than they ever will. And so to the extent that you can already review it and know where relevant information is on that video, you're going to want to make sure you identify that, point that out to the police. And you know, that'll go a long way, because sometimes they extract video and it takes a long time to sift through it. And you know your house of worship better than they ever will. And you want to make sure that you're an asset in that investigation. As far as you know, a video, if you can pull the actual video from the system, it will always be better than taking a phone and recording the screen. But sometimes you have to do that because of the circumstances. For whatever reason, you can't pull it directly from the system. If you have to, that's okay. But if you're in that situation, you're better off just recording the screen, making sure that you're displaying the timestamp and the date stamp, and trying to avoid talking over the video, giving commentary. Just try to avoid putting anything on there that's going to make it more complicated later on when it comes to presenting that video at trial, right? And so these are things to kind of think about. And whoever does know that system, does pull the information from the video from the system, that person should be providing their contact to the police, to the investigator, and they will, depending on how far it goes, will be reached out to again in terms of putting that video into evidence. You want to make sure that you're providing good follow-up contact information to the police who respond, because that's not the end of it, right? They show up, they do their initial processing, maybe there's follow-up, maybe there's other kind of forensic things that are looked into. But you want to make sure that they have contact information for whomever may be helpful in that follow-up. You also want to make sure that you obtain the investigator's contact information, you know, ask for that. And just keep in mind that it will take a while, but you can obviously check in with them and see how it's going if significant, you know, amount of time has gone by and you haven't heard anything. Let's see. So yeah, patience is key. During that process, there may be different procedures that take place. A suspect may be apprehended, right? And so you may be called in if you saw somebody, if you're in a position where you may be able to identify someone who's involved, you may be called in for photographic identification procedures, or a physical lineup or something like that. And so, you know, just keep in mind that first contact may not be necessarily the last time that you're working to help the investigator in that case. Now, once a perpetrator is identified and is charged, and now it's in the hands of the prosecutor's office, all right? The prosecutor's role is to assess the likelihood of obtaining a criminal conviction, either through a plea or a trial conviction, by assessing the information that they have, by assessing the evidence that was given to them. However, sometimes they enhance those cases. They go out with their own investigators and obtain more information or follow up with more interviews of witnesses. And so again, you may hear back from the DA's office, from the district attorney's office when it comes to that. Now, you know, there'll be a point where a district attorney or prosecutor is assigned specifically to that matter. And so it's a good idea to get that person's information, their name and contact if you can. And, you know, that'll be the person that's going to be the point of contact at the prosecutor's office when it comes to that investigation. Like I said, that's going to take a while. As far as charges that they're going to apply to that, you know, it could be what the charges that were recommended by the police were, or it could be that they add some charges or they take away some charges, but they're looking at it through a legal lens, and it may change. They're obviously going to want to be looking for signs that it was a hate crime, right? And you know, they should be looking for that automatically if it's an attack on a house of worship. So like I said, be patient with that process. But, you know that as a victim of a crime, you definitely have rights. I encourage you to look up the Washington State Crime Victims Bill of Rights. There are, there's the Victim Rights Act. There are requirements in terms of updating victims of crime as to what's going on with the case, as to offers that are being considered or extended. And just know that whether or not a plea offer is taken before trial, it ultimately is up to the prosecutor and the judge, but they should absolutely be taking your input into consideration. Now it's going to be a long process. It could even be months. It could be over a year. And so don't be surprised if you don't hear anything for a long time, and then you get reached out to come in and talk about these things again, either at their office or in a hearing, or eventually at a trial if it gets to that point. In terms of and if it does get to the point where it goes to trial, you should be prepared to testify. They should bring you in and kind of talk to you about what the subject matter is that they're going to talk to you about in court. And you should, at the end of the day, you're just talking about what you know and what you saw and what you experienced and nothing more. So you can kind of demystify that, let them do their job, and all you're doing is talking about what you know and what you experienced. And then as far as at that point, whether or not you wanted to go forward, sure, you can express your position on that, and absolutely express your if you need an interpreter, if you need a victim advocate, if you need any kind of accommodation in terms of your scheduling, like just make yourself be heard, because they should absolutely be considering these factors into their process. And so the main point that I want to make to you is that, there's a lot to it, and there's definitely more that I can get into. But the main thing is just remember that it can be a long process. It can be frustrating, and it often will be. But if the goal is to hold the person who did this accountable, to send the message that it's not okay for people to carry out these attacks, and that there will be accountability for it. It's not going to undo what you experienced. It's not going to fix the damage that was done. But there is potentially a sense of closure in knowing that you played a direct role in helping to make sure that that there is some accountability for that action. Please feel free at any time to reach out to me, to reach out to CAIR Washington. Like I said, I've worked on hundreds of criminal cases, and I can absolutely be there to guide you, to help facilitate conversations with the police, to help facilitate conversations with the prosecutors from the beginning through the end. And we're definitely here to support you and to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. I know you have so much to share on this topic, and you're an expert on these issues. And so appreciate you giving us that piece of it, and that there's so much more that you could say. And I'm also seeing folks wanting to get in touch, and CAIR Washington is definitely here for folks. I'm also seeing questions in the chats, and so folks know we will have time for question and answers at the end. So please drop them in the chat or on Facebook. Also hope folks saw that Imraan did drop a mosque safety guide into the comments. So definitely check that out. And we're happy to continue to share that with folks. So now back to our conversation, I wanted to take a step back. Brother Naeem, as an elder of our community with a long history of activism with the Black community and the Black Muslim community and the Black and Muslim community, right? You've seen a lot. And given how our communities are already over surveilled, sometimes we may not want to rely on police or solely on police for our protection. So what can you tell us about how we can build our own sources of mutual safety and protection?
Well, first of all, I would like to say, with God's name, the merciful benefactor, merciful redeemer, that we ask for his protection. But at the same time, there's a saying, to tie your camel. So we pray to Allah, for protection, but we tie our camel. And one thing about Louise, I want you for my lawyer. It's very, very thorough, very thorough. So that was really good information. I want you as my lawyer.
Thank you. I'm here for you.
Thank you. There's many things. I don't know how far you want me to go. One of the things is, the cost of security, video cameras, so forth and so on. If you want 24-hour protection with, security officers or people from the masjid or whatever. One of the things in the Nation of Islam, it might apply to us, but probably not. When you came to the temples, as we used to call them there, people were searched when they came in. So that was one way to make sure people didn't have weapons or drugs on them and so forth. We really don't do that, but that was one of the things. The other thing with that is that we had a unit in the Nation of Islam, the Fruit of Islam, and that was, we did training. We drilled, we did martial arts, so forth and so on. So that was one of the things, and we were always on alert for high security. Whether we were out selling papers, the Muhammad Speaks at that time, now the Muslim Journal, we were on alert, and we usually didn't go by ourselves. There was at least two of us. So security is really everybody's responsibility. One thing I've noticed, events, not necessarily at the masjid, but events that we hold, that there's been really, until recently, little security. People just walk in, off the street, which is good. You want people to come in, but no one was really monitoring that. I think they are now. I know at different times at WASAT, when they were on Rainier and Orcas, having their meetings, a lot of time we go in, there was really no security. So Brother Benjamin would kind of pull security by the door. And usually I would come in a little bit later and I might put security on the door because it was just like no one was, paying attention. One of the things I think has had a profound effect was what happened on 9/11. That put us as Muslims more on alert. One of the things that the community of Imam W.D. Muhammad, when his father died, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he was the elected leader to the Nation of Islam. And what he did, he made changes into the nation. Just real briefly, he turned us to the right concept of Allah, of the Creator. And he also did a lot of interfaith work long before many other people did. And then all of a sudden, the Muslim community after 9/11, they wanted to have interfaith with everybody because, everybody's looking at Muslims, whether if you're wearing a kufi or hijab, et cetera, et cetera. So you're a target now. So the work that he did was, to really bring bridges. And like I said, masjids are being attacked, churches, the people that got killed, in the Black church, a couple of years ago. So everybody's kind of on alert. So what are the suggestions? What is the suggestion? Security is everybody's responsibility. If you're at a masjid, you have the cameras, because if someone does arson, if you don't have 24-hour protection, that's kind of hard. But you have security, and people are on alert. At Al Islam Center, we had security. People would come in. I would usually be at the, when a person came in, they had to go past me, and I'd, check them out, look them out and everything. And I usually didn't have a weapon on me, but I usually wore my steel-toe shoes. So if someone acted up, I was going to break their legs and go from there. And, we had other people do security, but another thing is to have, have a practice drill. And if there's children involved, don't make it scary. Just say, hey, if there's an emergency, we're going to do A, B, C, and we're going to do this, and then have an alarm. And that alarm could be that voice, that human voice. You might have an alarm like they always do in the movies, red alert, like on Star Trek and everything else. Whatever was easy, to have people on alert. Yeah, there's so much. Here, procedures, what to do in case of an attack. If there is an attack and you're in the masjid or wherever what are you going to do? You should have certain people who are there, okay, at a particular day, you're assigned to do this, this, and this. Have a plan laid out and, practice it a couple times and have where the entrances are and where your exits are and how you're going to get out and who's going to stop who. Now, in the Black Panther Party, usually our confrontations was with the police, because the reason why it was formed because we were tired of Black folks getting beat up and misused by the police. So we used to be called, the original name was the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, and it started in Oakland, California in 1966 by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. And the first program that they did was police patrol. So they would patrol in Oakland, on a Saturday night one time, the police stopped a guy and, was getting ready to beat him up. He didn't really do anything. And then the Panthers had 6 people in the car. That's when they had big cars. And they would come out. And Huey P. Newton, who was, one of the co-founders of the Black Panther, he got out the car. And the police said, "What are you doing?" And he would use some, bad language to him. He says, "We're here, watching you." So the police would say, "Well, you got to, N-words got to get out of there." And he would recite the law. And it's important to know the law that we could, we could watch you and we can observe you. And so then, the police, he just left and let that go. And then that's how this legend spread it in the Black community that there was a group here willing to protect your rights. And it moved on from that. It later just became the Black Panther Party, and they had survival programs, free breakfast program, free medical clinic, a program for elderly people where these militant Panthers would take elders to the bank, to the grocery store, and different things of this. But the thing was that the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, they were not concerned about our guns. The thing that they hated most, the number one program they hated most was the free breakfast program, because we were feeding kids, students. So in the Seattle area, we had over 2,000 people a week. So why am I bringing this history up? It's just important to know that people will stand up, and throughout time, and to add what they have to put forward. And what I'm getting to is that the men and women in the Black Panther Party, they did security. Everybody did security. They cooked, everybody. So everything, the women did security, the men cooked, everybody with every responsibility. So there again, security is everybody's responsibility. So I think we should have a plan in our masjids, at our events. Okay, who's going to do security? What are our procedures? What is the alarm? What to look for, and how to stop somebody. Now, when you get to the thing when there's an arson, it's kind of tough because if you don't have 24-hour security, and even if you do, you can only watch the front, not the back of the building. But some of the things that I learned is to have this interfaith connection with people. We're a minority in this country, and there are many things wrong with America. Oppression, slavery, so forth and so on. But we can practice our religion. There's no law that says we can't. Now, there are different areas in the country where they try to stop the building masjid and so forth and so on. But nobody here is dictating how you give your khutbah and so forth and so on. So I think we have more freedom here than sorry to say, than so-called Muslim countries, because a lot of them have dictators. So I would say as the Quran says, take the best thereof, have good relations with, the police department and your community. Have good relations with your neighbors. I remember at Mount Lake when they first started, people were parking their cars everywhere, blocking people in, the neighbors and so forth. And this was a long time ago, at least 20 years ago, probably even longer than that. But have relations with your community around you. So if something happens, neighbor says, yeah, I saw such and such, and so forth and so on. So we try to build those alliances. Trying to think, there's other things I want to say. But the main thing is have a procedure, go through it. And if there's children involved, just say, hey, we're doing an emergency, if something happens, whatever. And have people on security that, are willing to, do what needs to be done. And, and try to have good relations with people in the community. Like I said, the police department, your neighbors, so forth and so on. And just use common sense. The prophet, peace be upon him, he didn't force religion on anybody. He just explained it. And, that's what we do. And just form coalitions with people and just be alert, just be alert. So I think that's about it for right now. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Naeem. That was very important information. I just want to, jump on to the concept of safety team, because that I think is something, if we just rewind like prior to the pandemic, there were quite a few very violent incidents that took place globally against houses of worship and beyond. If you look at like the Christchurch shooting, where 55 Muslims were killed. You have Quebec City massacre where 6 Muslims were killed in a house of worship. You have the Pittsburgh shooting at a synagogue, Poway, California. And you have, of course, Dylan Roof walking into a Black church in Charleston, South Carolina. So in which Brother Naeem mentioned as well. So the pandemic may have also, I think, slowed down some of these like violent attacks in some way, shape, or form. Like sadly, you can say mass shootings has gone down because of sort of like social distancing, which is just, jarring to even say something like that. But we also, as community members, have to understand that we're living in a time when there is a great deal of violence being, put out there through, lax gun laws and just like the proliferation of semi-automatic weapons and so on and so forth, and just the overall spread of hate within society. So I think what Brother Naeem talked about in terms of Masajid having a safety team is extremely important, because what we see is that you have board elections, every year, every 18 months, every few years. So the people who are cycling on to Masjid teams are, sometimes people who are, new to the board, to the facility, to the community. So there may be like a lack of continuity that exists when it comes to who are the team members on the team. So I think that's just something as an overarching concept for our houses of worship, that we ensure that, when you're having those board meetings, I think one specific component of it needs to be prioritizing safety. So having those 5, 6 to 10 people, people who are not even on the board, but people from within the community who are part of, committees, who can be like, okay, on Jummah prayer, for example, for first Jummah, we're going to have, like at least 4 or 5 people that can help people understand where exits are. If God forbid anything ever happens in that type of situation, we don't ever want anything like this to happen in a facility where an act of violence is exacted on our community, or somebody tries to attack us. But I personally, in Phoenix, Arizona, I saw like the largest armed mosque protest take place in front of our community with like militia groups and things like that came out, and it was protected by the quote unquote First and Second Amendments. It was called a free speech rally. And so, but like you see this intersection that exists in terms of, this gun culture and anti-Muslim sentiment. So we should also always be, I think, cognizant. And so having these types of teams within the community, like Brother Naeem said, you don't have to scare children, but have an understanding of like what these drills are and things like that. Because you don't ever want anything to happen where we're unprepared and to have any type of, like really violent attack taking place. So just reiterating that point, and then, yeah, I'll let Sumayyah go from there.
Thank you, everyone. Brother Naeem, sharing your knowledge of what we've been doing in over history through the Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam. What you've done and what you've experienced is so important for us to like reflect on and learn from. And I'm seeing in the chat, Brother Mustafa sharing some of the steps that they've taken in Olympia. And I really appreciate this, because we really do need to learn from each other and help each other out. And as Brother Naeem said, reach out to our neighbors. That's part of our faith too. Reach out to our interfaith community. And also preparation is part of our faith too, right? It's sunnah to be prepared. And so as someone who's not always good at that myself, let's just encourage ourselves to really do that. And it's obviously so important. So as I said, we had some questions in the chats, and I think one that kind of struck me is, that from Natasha, what if as victims we want the perpetrator to be educated about our religion to like combat hate? So kind of talking about like the root causes of hate, right? And I know that I've done some research on this, and it's a reflection of the racism and the bias within our society that we have hate crimes at all. And so, prosecuting one person for a hate crime doesn't get to that root cause. And so, of course, as communities who are targeted by this, we want to get at those root causes. And so, do folks have thoughts on alternatives, whether it's restorative justice or education, as a response to these kinds of incidents?
I mean, from my perspective, it's extremely commendable, and we actually absolutely should be talking about these alternatives. I think at the beginning stages, when something just happened, it's so early on, they're still investigating, they're still trying to piece it together. At the initial stages, you don't really fully know what's going on. You see what you see at your house of worship, and but there are things going on behind the scenes where possibly, in many cases, there is a connection between this attack and other attacks. There may be a pattern. And so, you kind of have to give it some time to see how it develops and what you're dealing with before we can really have that conversation about a particular case and whether or not we should be exploring those alternatives with that accused. And I think that conversation needs to happen. I just think it needs to happen after the police have done their thorough investigation, and with us making sure that they do their thorough investigation. And then after that, seeing if there's any connection to other incidents. And then, after that, like I said, it ends up being the ultimate decision of what the prosecution's office is going to offer and what the judge is willing to accept, and whether or not the accused wants to take a plea of guilty, right? So all these things kind of have to be a part of that conversation. The thing is, while we would like to be able to explore alternatives and to prompt that person to want to learn more about the faith and to kind of start shedding away those layers of hate. Unfortunately, there doesn't, in those one-off cases, it doesn't really seem to be that much of an incentive for them to do so until there is some kind of possible accountability out there if they fail to meet those conditions, right? So to get to that point, the evidence has to be there, the charges have to be there, the case has to be viable, and then there's that conversation. And then that person who's accused is more likely to want to have that discussion about alternatives and whatever their reason is for taking an alternative disposition that involves some kind of a program or that involves working with the Masajid, and they may just see it as an alternative to going to jail or suffering other consequences, and that's fine. But the benefit is they may learn and grow in ways that they didn't expect to, and it may end up being better for all parties involved. But absolutely, it's a conversation that needs to be had, that needs to be explored. And we should always be, the community should always be expressing those interests and desires with the DA's office.
Yeah, I'll just add that I spoke with a woman in the prosecuting office in DC who runs restorative justice circles, and she's taken hate crimes in her circles, and has said that some of the most, and these are juvenile restorative justice circles, and she said that some of the most profound conversations she's seen have come in the context of hate crime, victim and perpetrator conversations in those circles. And it's heartening to think about, but obviously there's many other factors to consider, as Luis just described.
And by the way, the restorative justice thing, yeah, we have to keep in mind that does have an impact on the victim of a crime that's participating in it. Oftentimes they have to relive the experience. And so they're giving even more of themselves in that process. So it's very complex, obviously.
Right. Yeah, it definitely has to be without coercion, and with power dynamics in mind, right? Like it can't be an opportunity to re-victimize the victims, for sure. Any other thoughts on this question?
Yeah, just quickly, I'll add, I think what Luis outlined is pretty prescient. And in Arizona, we encountered a similar situation where two members of a patriot type group stormed into a mosque in Tempe, Arizona, and they, same thing. They were Facebook living it. They were getting all these different views. They were bringing little kids, their own children, to take part in the actual hate attack. And it was really sort of jarring to see something like this. And so that question sort of came up, I think, from the Masajid leadership, do we want to pursue this, and should we do something sort of be forgiving? So that's a tough situation to navigate. And I think Luis laid out a lot of reasons. I think it comes through the process where let the agencies do their jobs and their investigation. Usually the time for sort of restorative justice comes within the confines of that process. So what ended up happening is that we knew that the people were not going to be assigned jail time from that attack. And so that opportunity arises. And so one of the negotiations that gets into play with the attorneys is that, okay, yeah, they're going to get community service for this sort of hate attack. We want them to do it at a Muslim organization. So these members of this super hateful, vitriolic anti-Muslim hate group are now having to volunteer at my wife's organization, Helping Hand It for Relief and Development. And they're, spewing all this anti-refugee sentiment, but they are now folding clothes and packing boxes to go to refugees. But they're also dealing with Muslims in the space. And what you ended up seeing from these people is that I never knew a Muslim until now. They were very, very sorry for what they did, and they were in a bad headspace at that time. And so going through that process and finally dealing with Muslims face to face and seeing that Muslims are the same as them and out for justice and so on and so forth, I think was very eye-opening to them, and they're really apologetic for what they did. So I think it all can come through in that type of process.
Yes, I would like to add, just for a frame of reference, one of the things as the media portrays Muslims, there was a TV program called Little House on the Prairie, and then there was another program that came out, Little Mosque on the Prairie. And it was a nice little show, kind of comedy, showed Muslim life, the problems and so forth and so on. But it was good, but it was taken off because one church protested that show because they weren't showing Muslims as terrorists and things of that nature. So one of the things we need are our own TV programs, and then our own newspapers and so forth. So I'm going to plug the Muslim Journal newspaper to get a subscription, or sometimes as we call a prescription, and it's www.muslimjournal.com. So www.muslimjournal.net. So www.muslimjournal.net. To go get that paper, go to the website and subscribe. You can get a physical paper or you could get it digitally. And this is one of the things that we use to, give to our neighbors so they have, some of the things. Because on the second page, it talks about, and I'll make it our Islam, universal beliefs. It talks about what is our Islam, who is a Muslim, how does one become a conscious Muslim, are all Muslims, are all Arabs Muslims, what is the Quran, so forth and so on. So we need to have our own system to get our message out. So, there again, the Muslim Journal is a good avenue, having our own TV programs. And we did have someone from CAIR a few years ago on our TV program. I don't know if it's on our archives, on our YouTube channel. But we need to work together because, as you know, unity, will help us a lot. And it's just like in the African-American community, when things happen to us, they don't care if we're Christian, Muslim, whatever we are, we still suffer from the same thing. So we need to portray Muslims in a better and a positive way. We don't have to be perfect, but I think this would go to help the situation. Thank you.
And by the way, if I can just piggyback on that, this conversation to me is evidence of that. I wish more people would be able to see that, right? Because a significant portion of this conversation was about, well, how can we find alternatives to incarceration? How can we have a situation in which, these barriers are kind of shed and people are growing and people are learning to care about each other as humans. And that's, it's really commendable, and I'm just proud to be part of this conversation and to see, that much compassion coming from the community.
Appreciate you all. I'm definitely feeling the same thing. And, thinking about, should we have regional safety committees for mosques and other institutions so that we can just force ourselves to keep talking to each other and learning from each other and supporting each other. Just throwing that out there. I know there was another question from Natasha talking, I think we all saw this on the news actually, that at the charge hearing, the perpetrator of I believe it was the arson, yelled that he belongs in an institution instead of jail. She's wondering if this is a way to avoid prosecution. Do folks want to take that one?
I'd have to look into that. I don't know what this situation is. But obviously anything that is said in open court may be referred to or used later on in determining how a case goes.
Yeah, I think it's about the connection between mental illness and hate crimes, and this is actually, if you take a step back, anybody who commits a hate crime, you could kind of argue that they have some kind of mental imbalance, or I don't know. It seems like something's out of whack. What is why then? I think the institutional kind of racism of society has a lot to do with why people with mental illness might then choose to go on a hate crime spree, right? But I'm kind of talking without a psychiatrist knowledge, but I think folks maybe in the community are wondering, is that a way to get out of accountability, or is that legitimate? And wondering if you all have any insight on that.
I'll just add, I'm not the legal mind here, but just in terms of the trends that we're seeing in terms of mosque attacks, there is a level of truth to there being disturbed individuals, people who might be sort of on the margins of society, who are taking part in a lot of these hate attacks. So people with legitimate mental issues. There was, I think, a mosque fire that took place in Houston a couple of years back, and it was somebody who was sort of a drifter who was just happen to set the mosque. So it is, I think, just something to alert for the community that these types of attacks, like in the case of the Mount Lake Terrace situation, like it seemed as though it was like two like disturbed individuals, but then there's the aspect of why are you taking the Qurans and like throwing them in a dumpster, and that is where sort of that hate element comes into it. So hate is going to manifest itself in a lot of different ways. It's not just going to be a straight up, like XYZ hate group is going to like show up at a masjid and like, deface it or do something like that. It could be somebody with a potential legitimate mental illness and their action is informed by, the propaganda they're seeing on, news networks or talk radio and things like that. And that causes them to act out. So I think with that proliferation in society and sort of that growth in folks who are suffering from a lot of these disorders, that should also, I think, put our facilities, on guard for these types of incidents taking place. And Sumayyah also mentioned regional like safety committees. I think that is something that's very smart. I would like to see that in Washington State, and I would be happy to be, a part of that from a CAIR perspective, where we can at least pool community resources to prioritize safety, possibly like community security grants for Masajid. So maybe like we as like institutions put some resources together and, instead of having to go, because there are strings attached when you're applying to like Department of Homeland Security for these types of grants. Do you want to like apply to the same agencies that are sort of like detaining Muslims at the border and things like that? That is an ethical question that we have to ask ourselves as well. So what, like many communities, like the Jewish community, for example, they pool a lot of resources just for community security, and then they're able to like be self-sufficient in terms of like handing out grants and things like that. And I know that's taken place in the Black community as well. So I think us looking internally to try and like form these types of committees, from amongst Masajid, Islamic organizations, and other organizations where we can make these types of assessments. Okay, these are the steps of like what you need in order to keep your community safe, and then going from there. So it's just sort of planting a seed. So I'd like to see, maybe Sumayyah can be on the board with us as well.
Mustafa makes a great point. He says the problem is a Muslim with mental illness is by default regarded a terrorist. Others just need mental counseling. So, I mean, it's definitely important to keep pointing that out, right? The difference in how generally society treats a white person who commits a crime versus a person of color or Muslim, right, specifically. And so those things need to absolutely be kept in mind. And, it's not in terms of mental illness or white supremacy and, being a bigot, it's not one or the other, right? These issues can overlap. And so both issues need to be looked into, and both issues need to be addressed. And one should not be the excuse for the other.
Thank you for that. I want to just encourage folks who have more questions to drop them in the chat or on Facebook. And I'm seeing that folks are kind of saying like, why are only Muslims being attacked by folks who are mentally ill? And it's definitely not just Muslims, right? It's like people of color, Black folks. The Atlanta shooting, what did they first say? He had a bad day, right? So there's definitely a connection there. And I think Luis's points are really significant, that how we're treated when we have mental health issues versus how white folks are is it just gets at the limitations of the system in general, right? And that we can't just rely on the system for our protection. And I know Brother Naeem already pointed out that our ultimate reliance is on Allah. And as members of the community, when we are taking the means to protect ourselves, we have to look beyond what the system provides, right? So if folks have more questions, I'm going to take them. And then in the meantime, was there anything that you wanted to share that you didn't get a chance to?
I mean, again, I just want to say, because, you know, we just talked about the blatant discrepancy between how a person of color or a Muslim is treated when they're the accused versus the person who's not. Like, seeing that, knowing that reality and seeing that discrepancy and still having compassion for someone who attacks a mosque. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think, again, it speaks very well of the community, and more people need to be aware of that.
Had to plug in the Muslim Journal.
Yeah, I think this was a great conversation. For our attendees, like, just want to like take a step back as well. Like, this is such a huge and robust conversation that we're having. So this is not like the end all be all of this discussion as well. You know, like Luis had like so much more to discuss today. I think we're going to continue to build off of this conversation, but I think this in and of itself was a great starting point to at least get, you know, folks from our community together and have this conversation. I know that we're gonna like put on some further trainings just to like talk about like what happens, you know, what are some things that you can do from a community perspective to safeguard our facilities and things like that. And so just look out for more of these discussions. And of course, we'd love to interface with Brother Naeem as well, and maybe even come on the YouTube channel to have that discussion as well.
Sounds good.
Yes, I'm excited to see more conversations happen. Last call for last comments. Can we do a go around? I feel like, Imraan, you just gave your final thoughts. Luis and Brother Naeem, do you want to give your final thoughts?
I would just say, as the saying goes, let's do what has to be done. One thing I learned from Black Panther Party is, you know, get the job done. You know, do what needs to be done. Don't wait, because you'll be waiting forever.
I just want to say thank you to you, Sumayyah, for you know, coordinating it, and Imraan, and of course Brother Naeem. You know, I'm humbled and honored to be here with you, and appreciate being part of the conversation.
Thank you all.
Thank you all, and thanks to Jessica in the back end doing our tech support, and to everyone who joined us. Again, like Imraan said, this is just the beginning of the conversation. CAIR Washington is here for any further questions you all might have. I think we were sharing emails with folks who might have some specific follow-up. And yeah, we're here for you. So that's our job, and the conversation continues. But for today, thank you so much, and assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.